And we are live with our 82nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome once again. We're at episode number 82. We're off and running. We're joined this week by Kelley Robinson. Ken and I have been the community is pretty active again this year. I just got back from AppSec California. Some really good talks on application security. Funny enough, right? But what else was I going to say? Oh, there was a couple items that we wanted to get into right off the bat. First of all was the recent podcast, and there's going to be a lot coming from actually Clint Gibbler. I can't get his name right, apparently. Clint Gibbler this week, his TLDR Sec newsletter came out right before AppSec California, where he actually went through and summarized all of the talks from last year's AppSec California. He took the time to watch every single talk. So they have like 4 tracks, everything from, JWTs that are near and dear to Ken's heart, and to the proxy stuff, Will Bankston, there's all sorts of stuff that's in there. But he actually went through and reviewed everything that happened last year, and gave like a nice TLDR of that conference in and of itself. It only took a year to get to it, but given the amount of content and the amount of work that went into it, it was a pretty impressive. It's a pretty impressive body of work. And in general, everything that's coming out from Clint recently, and huge shout out if he's listening, but everything that's been coming from him recently has been very, very well researched, well thought out, and is of huge value if you're running a program in an organization. His talk at AppSec Cali was an opinionated guide to scaling your company's security. This was like a 40-minute talk that he gave. And I think, Ken, when I shared it with you, I can't remember. It's like something like 190 slides, right?
Yeah, 194, I think. I was blown away.
Yeah. And if you actually look at what he did in the talk itself, and the talk will be posted online fairly, in due order. But what he did is most of those slides are actually reference material, right? Only about 60 or 70 of those slides did he actually present. But each of the 60 and 70 slides is, hey, if you're doing this in an organization, here are 3 talks that were really good that I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years that are actually related to that topic and will help you out. So it's like a meta talk about application security and, producing an application security program. So that was one of the highlights that I had there. There was a lot of other stuff that went on. And I feel like I'm talking too much. Ken didn't come out because he's lazy. You know about AppSec California, right, Ken?
I'm familiar.
Oh, okay. Just making sure, right?
It's probably a good thing I didn't. I'm fighting something, some sort of cold or flu or something. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, be careful with that, right? Yeah.
Seth, I don't know if you actually knew this, but I was at AppSec California speaking in the same exact slot as Clint.
Ah, you were, Kelley. I feel bad.
No, I think we split the crowd pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that the others were pretty busy. So at AppSec Cali, what were you speaking on, Kelley?
I was speaking about Shaken and Stir.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Then
I'm gonna post
so we're going to get into that in a minute.
Yeah,
so,
we'll talk about that.
So that'll be really interesting to compare and contrast. Yeah, well, you're all over the place then. Like, you're at ShmooCon this week, right? You're headed that direction, speaking on Shaken and Stir as well. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's everything that I've got off the top of my head. Outside of, I will be at B-Side San Francisco in a couple of weeks, doing a workshop on secure code review. Ken, what about you? Is there anything else you wanted to cover?
I'm just posting Kelley's slides right now, the link to her slides from AppSec Cali in the various channels. But did you mention Black Hat USA? I don't think we mentioned that.
Oh, no, I didn't. That happened right before. So it came out on Twitter, but Ken and I will be at Black Hat USA. We'll be giving our secure code review course. I'm pretty sure the name of this one is Next Level Bug Hunting Code Edition, right? We're going to see if we can get some black hatters interested in secure code review. Anyway, so
Thready threat hunting threats and stuff. Yeah,
threats and leet threats. Yeah, leet exploits through.
It is like a special version of the. Yeah. I mean, it is a special revamped for Black Hat crowd version of the training, but it is ultimately about secure code review.
Yeah.
But we had to make it sound really cool, so we went with that thready stuff.
Yeah, that thready stuff. Yeah. So we will be at Black Hat USA. If you're interested in the course, please sign up. It'll be, like Ken said, a special edition.
Oh, and one other thing to mention is that we're going to bring back the AppSec minute for the Portswigger, because we did Portswigger Top 10 2018. So now we're going to do that for the 2019. It's just we haven't gotten our crap together yet to do it.
Well, so, actually, if you're interested in the Portswigger Top 10, I think it's still open to vote on, at least for the next couple of days.
Oh, it's not.
Right?
Oh, for some reason.
Yeah, it's not solidified yet, right? So if you go to, we'll find the link and post it. But it's always interesting. I found it pretty interesting to actually go and review all of them, like what was nominated as opposed to just the top 10. So there's some other interesting ones that are in there that probably won't make the top 10, but are really relevant to, hey, I'm trying to protect my code base, or I'm building an application. So I'd take a look at those if you can. So.
Yep, I am posting the link right now, by the way.
Yeah, and I just gave Ken a whole bunch of work because I made him post all the links, and I'm the one that's just talking. So Kelley, let's talk to you.
Hello.
Welcome. Thanks for taking the time to come on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Especially between travel weeks, we both know how that goes. It's always, it can be fairly onerous, right? Just trying to make sure you're getting enough sleep, if anything.
No kidding.
Not getting sick.
So I talked about AppSec Kelley a little bit. What did you like about AppSec Kelley? Before we get into introductions, just give me your take.
Yeah, totally. So this was my third time at the conference, second speaking, which was really cool. I live in New York now, but I used to live in San Francisco, and so I was much more involved with that community. And getting to LA now is a bit more of a trek, but I still love that conference because who doesn't want to be in LA in January?
Right.
I mean, and people that have never been, it is just like the most beautiful location. All of like the in between talk time is you're just sitting next to a pool right next to the beach in the beautiful California weather, talking security with lots of very, very smart and interesting people. So it's always a really good time. I unfortunately couldn't make it for the first day this year. It conflicted with some of the stuff that we had going on with our Twilio company kickoff this year, but made it for the first night, the conference party, and day 2 of the talks. So had a really good time there.
Yeah, it's always it's a good one, and where it's hosted by those 3 OWASP chapters? I mean, it's at least like San Francisco, LA, and what is that, Orange County? Or I can't remember which 3. Yeah. And so they put on the conference together. So it's not necessarily a national conference like the global AppSec events. But it feels like it, given that, the number of people there is typically about 600, I think, attendees. And
4 tracks, training, CTF.
Yeah,
they do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, I got sucked into the CTF this year with a couple other people. And so spent some more time doing that than I probably should have, right? But, it's what a conference is about.
Did you have fun?
We did. We had a lot of fun. So
and I think it was well worth your time.
It was a good time. I probably didn't go to enough talks because I was doing that. You know what I mean? Like, you always have that trade-off.
I mean, but the talks are always posted online after. Like, I think they make for good talking points, but it's also meeting people at these conferences is sometimes the most interesting part.
Yeah, that does feel like a pretty good reunion. So. Cool. Good. Let's run through intros really quick, right? Ken, do you have the script and everything in front of you there?
Yes, although I don't necessarily need it because Kelley is, I mean, she's all over the place. And as you can tell from our conversation, she speaks a lot. But Kelley's a security advocate at Twilio. Is it Twilio/Authy?
So Twilio acquired Authy about 5 years ago. I specifically work on like the account security Authy side of Twilio's business. So that's why I sometimes mention that in professional related headlines.
Yeah.
My
well, in your background,
your employer is Twilio, but you work on Authy because Authy is really cool. Yes, I get it. Yeah. Cool.
That's not an easy thing to do, account security, which we're definitely going to delve into. I have so many questions. I think it's probably honestly what you all do is probably one of the most interesting aspects to me of web application security. So yeah, there's a lot to cover. I'm excited about that. And what's really interesting, we're going to ask you about your background, of course, but you spent a lot of time as a software engineer, and then now you're doing security, which is kind of that cool. We've seen this before, where you've got this like really strong, fundamental sort of knowledge, software engineering skill set, and then end up migrating to security, bringing, I think, multiple points of views as well as like a broader range of experience versus someone who maybe just goes right into security. So anyways, very awesome to have you. You have a great background. There's a lot of knowledge in your head. We're going to try and pick some of that out before we get to it, though. We want to hear a little bit about your backstory and how you ended up in security.
Yeah, totally. So I was in the first wave of actually programming boot camp graduates. And so I did a boot camp in the very beginning of 2013. Before that, I had been working in finance in New York and just didn't really see a future for myself there. And decided I was going to go learn some code so that I could start working in tech because tech sounded more interesting. I didn't know that I wanted to like specifically work in programming or software engineering or anything like that. But then I moved to San Francisco, learned how to code. And in 2013 in San Francisco, they were desperate for anyone that could smash their face against a keyboard. So I was very lucky and got a job as a software engineer after that experience. And yeah, I really liked it. And I did that for about 5 years. And then while I was, I did a lot of like backend software engineering, a lot of data engineering and distributed systems. I was doing a lot of stuff with Scala, which is a whole minefield of a different discussion. But a lot of the stuff that I was working on, I kind of got interested in the sharing aspect of it and the teaching. And so I started speaking at more conferences and started really enjoying that. And so when this opportunity opened at Twilio to join there. My title is developer evangelist at Twilio. They have a group of people like me who have a background in software engineering that help, promote Twilio products because Twilio products are for developers. So we have a suite of APIs that includes things like text messaging and phone calling, and then all of the stuff for like account security. And so APIs specifically for two-factor authentication and phone and email verification and that kind of thing. So any communication channel that you can use to do kind of like account security falls under my team's purview. And so I was the first person that was hired there specifically to do kind of the program product specific advocacy and evangelism. And so, my background was still all on the software side of things. And then I had to really dive in and start learning about like what is all of this stuff. And so this is really my first job where I've really gone deep on the security side of things. And I've been there for about 2.5 years now. And I think it's just so fascinating because, I do have that background in software, but I think, as you know well, a lot of the security stuff is so much more about the human element. It's so much more about the organizational psychology behind all of this stuff. And I like that I still get to code and still get to do some of that work, but I love just like talking to people about their situations and kind of decoding what their threat models and the practicality of any solution for them. And the company's been really supportive of me getting out there and talking about, general security concepts, and it's been a really good time.
So do you spend a decent amount of time because I mean, obviously you're speaking at security conferences, but do you also spend a decent amount of time at developer conferences? And if so, do you feel like there's a different vibe between the two types of conferences?
Absolutely, especially for like my first year at the job, like no security conference was accepting my talks because they were like, who is this person? And I didn't really like know that much about security. And so I was speaking a lot of like Python conferences and Scala conferences and general programming conferences. And there definitely is a different vibe there because some of the content that does well at those conferences, like I gave a talk that was basically like an introduction to public key cryptography at a Python conference, a couple of years ago. And that, not that there's not security folks that don't know those concepts, but I think it's much more common that at like a Python conference, some of those like, more basic introductory level type concepts play well there. And I think you kind of have to tailor your content and to your audience and who might be interested in what.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's like you mentioned with the human element that plays a part in obviously who you're.
With security conferences, there's obviously like the application security conferences that have a lot more people that are technical developers, but a lot of these conferences like ShmooCon or like, the DEF CONs and even to some extent, like a lot of the B-sides security conferences, you get so much variety of the types of talks there that you don't really like, it's not always focused on people that know how to code. Like you get a lot of people that are doing like SecOps or incident response of some kind. And like, these are much different domains than the stuff that I know well.
Yeah. No, that's like, I mean, we bemoan that fact, like locally here, right? So I'm in Salt Lake City and there's like an OWASP chapter. There's a small AppSec group. But there's a couple kind of general security conferences that go on. And I remember giving an AppSec talk, like building an AppSec program at at one of those security conferences. It got accepted. They're like, yeah, we want an AppSec track. And so I prepare this talk and I go in there and it's basically me and two guys, right? That's it. And this is a conference of like 800 or so people. And I'm just wow. Well, I guess I'll give you my talk, right? But we may we'll have a discussion because it was, and funny enough, one of them was Jason Chan from Netflix, who was also there giving a talk, right? And so I'm like, you don't really need this, but hey, let's talk about it. Yeah.
I don't know if you and I have talked about this much, but like being in AppSec and then going to regular, like just everything security conferences has like it's a strange feel. It's almost like, I almost feel like sometimes we're part of security, but like not in a way. I don't know how to explain it. It just doesn't feel the same.
Well, it doesn't.
And I think some of these, some of the talks that I give, I try to balance the content for the biggest level of audience, like define acronyms and not always dive into the technical details. And I think what you were talking about, what Clint did, is really good because like people don't go to conference talks to like learn how to like implement the nitty gritty details of anything. They go there to get ideas and be inspired and like look it up later. But I think like, and some of the feedback that I got after my AppSec Kelley talk was like, I wanted more technical content in there. I wanted more like, of the nitty gritty. And I think the application security audiences really, really like that.
Yeah. And I think that goes to kind of the audience, like you're talking to, right? It is super hard to please everyone that's going to be in your talk because you've got those people that, hey, they've been doing it for 10, 15 years and they're like, oh, this is a different take on something that I've already done. And then you've got the beginners that are like, what does AppSec stand for, right? Like, and I mean, even at something like AppSec California, I mean, you're better off going a little bit more technical at AppSec California or LocalMocoSec or some of those others. But even at DEF CON, I'm constantly surprised at the questions that people will ask when they come up after. I'm like, okay, like I thought I had this audience, but I really didn't. And even polling doesn't seem to help, right? It's so difficult to predict, right? And then, if you're going like Ken's saying, you're going to a Black Hat or a DEF CON, something like that. You've almost got to make it a different, like we have to make like a different set of slides and we have to use different language to be attractive to people in that audience. Whereas in an application security conference, we're going to approach it differently, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I like that you're intentional about that.
yeah. So speaking at a lot of developer conferences, right? Like how well was that received? Like I personally, I love going and like speaking at developer conferences. Just it feels like that's more of my people, like my background. But tell me a little bit about that experience for you. Like, do you feel like it was positive? Was there a lot of interest? How did that go?
Yeah, totally. And I think especially the type of security that I work on is like very in your face. It's something that a lot of people know about, both as a consumer and as somebody that like probably builds websites with a username and password and login. Like two-factor authentication and like consumer identity management is not something that's super foreign to a lot of people. And so I think in that sense, I'm lucky because I get to have these kind of conversations with people, introduce some of the like the technical concepts to them that they might not be as familiar with, but you're always going to have people that are opinionated about that. And I think that makes for good conversation at a lot of these events. So
very opinionated.
Oh yeah.
I think every time I've ever given a course to developers and given training, like the majority of the questions end up, especially when we get to like password guidance, like entropy and how to often to rotate and those types of things, it gets very like opinionated. It's not something you can gloss over. There's certain things you can kind of just 5-10 minutes, maybe at the most, probably 5 minutes spend time on. That's not one of them. Every time we get to it, it's just that gets beat to it. Expect a lot of questions, I feel like.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure it's because they get hit over the head, right? I mean, you think about being a developer and then compliance comes in. And every organization they go to is like, oh, well, no. It has to be at least 10 characters. And then you go to the next one. No, it's 12. But you don't need like the special character because it's 12 characters. And so there's that whole kind of discussion about complexity and storage and then rotation. And then we introduce in, well, you can't use MD5, right? Or, to store to store the hashes and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah, I mean, when we were, I'm sorry, both of you, I'm really struggling today voice wise, but when we were putting together talking points, I was kind of bringing up like the password guidance requirements and like how that's sort of changed and how the rotation periods have changed. But you had added something which I was kind of curious about, is like you mentioned about enterprise MFA versus consumer MFA, multi-factor auth. And I was definitely curious to hear you expand on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is something that we get into a lot and that I've thought of a lot, mostly because most people use Authy for consumer ID. This is, Pinterest is one of our customers. And so, if you add 2FA to Pinterest, you're using Authy for that. And this is much different than like Twilio as a company, right? Like internally for Twilio as a company, we use something different for like the employee 2FA and employee identity management. And I think there's different requirements for both of those, right? Mostly because like the trust chain for employees, you can call IT and you can be like, hey, I got locked out of my computer. I lost my YubiKey, like send me a new one. You can, have some kind of chain of trust there that like, if you have somebody that sends the YubiKey to the office address that's trusted, that says this has to be signed for by the office manager. The office manager knows your face, even if you're not like in the headquarters of the company, right? There's that kind of chain of trust that can happen so that you can get like unlocked out of your account. And I think one of the things that I think a lot about when it comes to like identity management is not just ease of use, but ease of account recovery. And it's just like a huge different scope of a problem when you have consumer identity. So like, if you get locked out of your Pinterest account, you like have to go talk to Pinterest, and then Pinterest like probably directs you to Authy. And so then you're dealing with like different sorts of account security problems there, because these are just like, someone like me that's logging into your Pinterest account because you wanted to like browse it after work is a much different type of situation than me like needing to get into my work laptop. And like, there's nobody on the Pinterest side of things that really knows who you are, right? Like you've got an email reset, probably. They probably have maybe a phone number on file for you. But other than that, like the identity trust chain there is just so much more fragmented and so much more untrusted.
Yeah,
we struggle with the recovery.
Yeah,
like there's been internal conversations, and it gets very, very, because we have this like internal discussion ongoing about, about like, because Google has an interesting approach, and they use all these different metrics to sort of verify you are who you are for account recovery. But like, that's incredibly difficult. I mean, Seth, have you ever thought about any of those things, those like how to verify that someone is who they say who they are,
Oh yeah. I mean, from your perspective, or like most consumer facing products, it's so difficult because you're basically, you're identifying them based on like components that they gave you, right? Like, so it's not, you're not going back to, a carrier or a bank or somebody else, like another trust source, like Kelley's talking about, as far as like an enterprise. Hey, we know this office manager, we know this manager, we've got another mechanism to validate that person that's outside of the normal, email address, phone number, right? Because typically that's it. And I know there was like, there's been some like attempts to solve that at a larger scale by a couple of companies using things like phone data or, other things. But I still think from a consumer perspective, that's very difficult, right? Unless you're the government and you can like pull up their, ID, their actual like ID.
But this is something else that some companies that are really like security conscious about this are starting to do. They're starting to force you to like mail in a copy of your like government identification in order to do account recovery.
And that brings another whole host of issues, though, right?
Yeah.
Along with, I'm giving you my government ID, so you're going to store that, or you're going to just like, I have to trust you as a company as well. Right. And how far do you trust Ken and his cohorts over there at GitHub? Because really, those guys are shady. Microsoft, gosh.
I know. Really can't trust that Ken guy.
Yeah. And then
what are some of the various factors that people use?
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Email reset is still like the biggest one for account recovery. Using the second factor as a mechanism for account recovery, like as a second factor, right? Like you never want it to get to the point where like you can just like reset your entire account with that factor. So you hopefully have access to the email and your 2FA. I think I was resetting my password on some website last week, and I think I tweeted about this. Like, in order to reset my password, and this is something that I don't know when I last logged into it, whatever. It specifically said the reset password will deactivate your 2-factor authentication, and I'm just like, no.
Yeah, they make you yeah. I have seen that
completely like ruins the point of 2FA.
And awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Like it was. I mean, we had a friend. Yeah. Kevin Cody that's been on the podcast a few times, right? For a while he had a GitHub account that he lost the 2FA for, right? Like he got a new phone, couldn't remember the password, and I'm pretty sure the only reason he was able to get it reset is because he knew Ken and his cohorts, right? Like because again, there was no. They're like,
GitHub is one of the ones that like they're like, you lost your backup keys. Sorry, like we told you.
Yep.
Sucks to be you.
So I think like every
Cody,
month I'm like, hey, y'all as people who care about your code on your accounts, that's something that you should probably write down.
Yeah.
But obviously,
by the way,
I know more about this. But like, I thought one of my friends ran into this recently, and I thought it was interesting the way that like you do account recovery, which is like I think there is a way, at least for her, there was a way to like reclaim the account after some amount of time had passed.
Yes. So with Kevin Cody, it was 6 months. It was 6 months. This is why we were having those discussions about improving it, because it was. He had to wait 6 months, and like I even reached out internally. I was like, I know I worked with him. He worked we work at the same company. I know for a fact that's his account, and then I'm talking to Kevin Cody, and it still wasn't enough. So I mean, obviously some improvements there. And honestly, what's kind of funny, well, it worked. It's funny because it turned out well. But last week, so that was a consumer. Now internally, Jason White at Misfire on Twitter, he's on our AppSec team and had been skiing, and his phone lost in the snow. He ended up finding it, but deactivated, and thought he was going to have to, do the duo or whatever he was using all over again. And it was no joke. Me being the man in the middle, like talking to him on our personal channel to our internal team to just get his account. Like it got to the point where I had to just like be on Slack DMs, just relaying information back and forth between the two of them. So it's just like, it's such a, I don't think people understand how difficult of a problem it is. And I will say Neil from ProdSec posts like stats every once in a while. And it's surprising, like what is considered a good metric for people using two-factor auth. Like for instance, if even with technical users, I consider GitHub users to be technical people. Yeah. Even at like 10% of people enabling it, that's like a good number. Like you're doing well, and that's astonishing to me. Yeah, I don't know. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, and I mean, like I do some work with like Twilio's identity team, and like we just rolled out some changes to Twilio's two-factor authentication for logging into your Twilio accounts. And yeah, I don't know them off the top of my head, but the metrics that we have that we're like shooting to aim to like get people to turn it on, it's not that high.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy to me, and like it's super, super important.
But I mean, I think what you were saying about not being able to bypass the system, even for somebody that you knew, is like, I think that's important, because I think a lot of companies, and I don't really care what a company does, as long as they're like intentional about it, like, and have put some thought behind it. But so many companies basically allow their support teams to just disable two-factor authentication on an account if somebody calls in and is locked out. And I think, like that's a solution, right? Like, and that's a solution that hopefully that company decided was worth their time.
The risk.
Worth the risk and worth getting people back into their accounts. But I just hope that people are intentional about that.
Yeah. Well, that's the one that all the social engineers love, right?
Right. Yeah.
All I need is the email address and maybe the employee ID. And then I call up and I say, "Oh, I lost my phone and I can't get in. Can you reset my password and disable my 2FA at the same time?" Right?
Yeah. There was a company that I was working with that did something incredibly egregious where they I had to call in to reset my 2FA based on what they were using. They had it keyed to something weird, and so when I got a new phone, I had to call in to reset, and in that process they changed my password and volunteered my username to me while I was on the phone with them. And I was like, come on, people.
Wonderful.
I don't know. I don't know about you two, but that's one of the biggest fears that I have when I upgrade a new phone is losing 2FA, right?
Yeah.
Because
that's my
of the number of
one.
tokens and between oh crap, was that in Duo or Authy or Google Authenticator, and all of a sudden I can't get into an account and I have to go through the reset process, or I have to, if I forget to disable it on one phone before I re-enable it on another, that's a huge problem. And I don't feel like the industry in general or companies actually think about that, right? Yeah. There are those that do, but a lot of them just enable 2FA, right? Okay, what happens when that consumer changes their phone number, right?
Changes their phone number, or for the app-based 2FA, just gets a new phone. I mean, it's funny, we always kind of budget for or expect higher support tickets around the holidays when people get more get new phones. So we expect people to be right into Authy support around that time.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I never thought about that. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And I also saw some interesting, I got an email from, I can't remember the company, but maybe it's like Zapier or somebody like that emailed me right before the holidays being like, hey, like, by the way, remember to like log in and update your 2FA if you're getting a new phone. They basically like preempted that. And I thought that was an interesting thing that they were trying to like, whatever their decision of like the cost to send out these emails to every single person that has a Zapier account is less than like the support costs that we might get from people that get locked out of their accounts.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, though, given that it's only 10% or so of your users that even bother with 2FA, it's probably not. It probably wasn't a huge deal. So along those lines, right? What's your take on SMS 2FA versus app-based versus the tokens?
I mean, I think especially in the like consumer 2FA world, like SMS-based 2FA is like fine for a lot of things. It is an insecure medium, though. Like you can easily, especially with SIM swapping, like it's so easy to get into somebody else's account. But like for so many of these things, what you want to do is just make it a little bit harder for people to attack you. Yep. And if somebody is super inclined to phish you or to do some kind of targeted attack, it's probably like, targeted attacks against you are probably going to be successful if the person has significant time and resources. But I think like Google finally released some stats about this last year in May that actually backed this up. That it was like SMS-based 2FA actually prevents 76% of like kind of phishing attempts, automated phishing attempts. And so it's like a pretty high number that even like the lowest level of security prevents. Mm-hmm. And so I just get annoyed when people are like blanket statements like SMS 2FA is bad. Anybody that implements that on their website should be like murdered. And I'm like, come on, people, like there's a time and a place. And I think for a lot of these companies that have consumers that might be like older populations or people in other countries or people in, some kind of situation that like they might not have access to a smartphone. You want to support that additional channel for the people that need it. But I think what companies can do is like you want to delight your security conscious consumers. And so add in additional, more secure channels like app-based TOTP methods, and then allow the people that don't want that to turn off SMS 2FA.
Yeah. I totally agree, right? It's like a whole risk. I know I go through kind of a risk process with that, right? Like, what is it that I'm like, what am I accessing, right? Is it like code and intellectual property that people have access to, or is it, is it just some social media that I like log into or I check like once every 6 months, right? Like there's an obvious difference there. The problem that I have going to security conferences is exactly what you're saying, right? People get up and they're like, well, we don't want to use SMS 2FA. And I'm like, hold on. If I can get, my mother-in-law to enable 2FA via SMS, I am going to do that. Because the second that I put an app on her phone, that means I have to support it through her upgrade process, and she's going to be frustrated. Whereas SMS, like it's this whole like, how much work is it going to take me versus actually having something that the company has thought through. So.
Well, and that's why so many companies love it, is because the onboarding process is so straightforward. Like it doesn't require an additional app. It's already like we talked about, so hard to get people to turn on 2FA that like. Adding an additional process, like I think you should delight your security conscious users, and I think that like you should support it if you have the resources to, and you're protecting things that people perceive to be of value. But like it's for like your pizza accounts, like you probably don't need 2FA on those, and if you do, you certainly don't need like super secure forms of it.
Yep. Yeah.
And then every more secure form of that you add, like, I was just going to say, like the app-based 2FA, it ends up like it's going to cost you more for account recovery too. And so, like, again, like I'm super supportive of people adding this. Like, I think it's probably the way forward. But like until we get a mass adoption of the Google authenticators and the Authys on everybody's smartphone apps, we're probably going to see SMS 2FA around for a while.
Yeah.
Ken? What were you going to say? Super interesting. And apologies about my connection. I think my connection is a little choppy today. But I was going to just mention this quote, which I thought was really interesting from that Google paper, which says, our research shows that simply adding a recovery phone number to your Google account can block up to 100% of automated bots, 99% of bulk phishing attacks, and 66% of target attacks that occurred during our investigation, which was a year-long joint study between a couple different universities and them. So that was interesting. It's a pretty significant number to quote.
I think a couple paragraphs below that is the 76% number that I was quoting earlier. Like, I think that's, SMS-based 2FA blocks 76% of targeted attacks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with that, right? Like, it really is at a very, and like you said, enrolling a phone number is a super cheap, easy way to actually enable 2FA for a company as well, not just the consumer, it's consumers themselves. So,
but I mean, this is where like the threat modeling always comes in, right? Like, your base, you probably want people to add more secure forms of identity verification on their accounts, because those targeted attacks have a lot more value behind them. And so people are going to put resources into trying to get into your accounts, especially if you've been tweeting about how many Bitcoin you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, making yourself a target. That's classy. I'm posting a link, by the way, to your blog post that explains, because we have about 13 minutes left, and we want to get to this stir and shake. Although I swear an hour never feels long enough, because we could sit here and talk about this forever. Yeah. But I'm going to post a link to your blog post where you explain stir and shaken. But I would rather hear it directly from you, so that we can learn a little bit about what exactly stir and shaken is.
Yeah, totally. So stir and shaken, I'm actually going to have to look up the acronyms again, because I always forget them. They're like egregious backronyms for stir is secure telephony identity revisited, and shaken is, you have this in front of you by chance?
Yeah, I do. It's
signature-based handling of asserted information using tokens. It's, James Bond reference, and they tried to, one of my favorite things is there's like a proposal for something new that's lemon twist, which is like this agrees thing that's like leveraging models for enterprise dialing. It's just like, it's terrible.
Everything has to have an acronym. Yes.
Yeah.
And an icon.
The branding of it is good, right? Like, it's, branding the CVEs and branding like the exploits is one thing that like people remember Heartbleed. Everything comes back to marketing. Yes. But basically what this is the way I'd like to frame it is like, what if we had TLS for phone numbers? And so with all of the problem with spam calling recently, one of the reasons this is a problem is, one, like automated dialing is super cheap now, and two, like you can spoof any number. And the way the telephony networks are set up now, there's not really any security on that. And so Shaken specifically is what's going to do that signature-based handling of saying that I know that this is a phone number that you own, and I'm going to assert through the phone network as I hand this off to other carriers that this is a number that I know the person like that's behind this number, and is going to be using public key infrastructure for all of that.
So is that like a is that an internationally, is this going to be like an international standard then?
I hope so, but right now it's being incredibly focused in the US. I mean, obviously the technology itself could be applied internationally, but the reason that we're having conversations about this is because this was actually mandated by the Traced Act, which is a US law that was signed into law about 4 weeks ago. So this is all like very new stuff. And the Traced Act is saying like, hey, we're going to prosecute people that are doing spam calling, specifically people that are using anything to like defraud people. So automated dialing obviously is not illegal because, you have things like appointment reminders. You have things like, come pick up your prescription, or your kid's school is closed. Like, we can't like just rule that out. And unfortunately, we also can't completely ban number spoofing, because there are some legitimate ways that people are using that based on the way that the phone networks are set up. So they basically have this law that was actually the 2009 Truth and Caller ID law that was saying, hey, you can only use spoofing if you're not trying to like defraud or harm someone. But it turned out that was really hard to actually enforce. And so shake and stir is one way that they're going to do that signature handling and signature like assertion on the from number, and then also make it a lot easier to trace back calls to the originating dialer, so that we can prosecute the bad actors more easily.
And I think that one of the links I had read said they were going to like give you, is this the right term? Like it's sort of like giving you a risk rating. So like not just a hard, you're bad or you're good. It seemed like there was maybe more to it, so that they could kind of, like you said, sort of that, important stuff gets dropped.
Yeah. So part of so this is all using like JWTs as part of the signature that is being passed through the initiation like headers. And so telephony has this thing called SIP, which is a session initiation protocol, which is a way to initiate VoIP calls. And then it's kind of like an HTTP request. So you can basically like add some metadata and headers in the request when you start a call. And one of the headers for that's being added as part of Shaken is an identity header. And in that header, what we have is an attestation level. And I think that's what you're referring to, which is basically like there's three attestation levels that you can give. Even all of these three levels, like none of these, even the lowest one is like, this is a spam caller, don't trust this. It's like some level of like saying, I have some level of trust in this caller. The attestation level A is saying like, I know this consumer and I know that they have access to use this number. B is saying, I know the customer, but I don't know the number maybe. And then attestation level C is like, I don't know the customer, but I know that like I originated this call. And so like, there's different levels of this. And I think what we're going to be seeing is probably just for attestation level A. So I know this customer and I know that they can use this number. We're going to see the device manufacturers, so like the Googles and the Apples, tightly in cooperation with the main U.S. carriers, so Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, those folks, they're going to start displaying some kind of like identity verification in a call when it's incoming. And so that could be like a green check mark. That could be something that says like call verified. That's kind of up to the device manufacturer and the carrier to decide how they want to display that. And unfortunately, right now, there's not a lot of regulation or consistency around how that's going to be displayed or enforced.
So is the standard still in draft sort of form, and not necessarily all the implementation details figured out, or is it more of like, with web browsers, how like Chrome and Safari and Firefox all want to do things differently, and so then it becomes more of that kind of an issue versus like the protocol itself.
Yeah, so think of it like Shaken is in place, like the draft is like finished, that's been published, there's an RFP for it. I think they're pretty sure about how that all is going to work. And it's going to be exactly like the latter. Like think of like Apple and Google as Chrome and the Firefox in this case, like they're going to have to decide how they want to display this kind of information to people. And so I imagine it will be something similar to what the URL bars have done, which is something like the lock in the URL bar for trusted things, and then something like the, not secure in the URL bar, you display a potential spam caller if they get a call through their network that either hasn't been signed by Shaken or maybe has a lower attestation level. But I think right now that's up to them to decide how they want to do that.
I mean, is adoption occurring this year? Is it like mandated that it occurs this year?
Yeah, so part of the Trace Act is mandating that adoption, that all of the major carriers do this within 18 months, starting like December 30th when this bill was signed into law. So they have until like mid-2021. But I know at least like Comcast, Verizon, and AT&T all started working on this last year. I don't know exactly like what their level of doneness is, but the other problem is like there's over 4,000 service providers in the US, and so they all have to do this. Like it's an infrastructure wide, like industry wide situation. Like if somebody is sending you a signature authenticated call and you don't have the way to like tap into the PKI to like you haven't like set yourself up to like validate their public key yet, and it's not going to do much good for the person on the other side of the call.
One question I kind of have, because I'm sort of not like I'm not super familiar with the world of, telephony based fraud. So, I think of it in my head as more of an annoyance when I get these calls, but clearly there's more egregious things happening than that. And I was just curious if you could share some of like what the types of fraud are, what is this really aimed at type of
yeah, I think a lot of it is like identity fraud. And so people calling you saying like, hey, your social security number needs to be like refreshed or something, like please call back and give me your social security number. And there's a lot of like, we have aging populations that grew up in a time that telephones were trusted. And so they're, starting to be a set of very vulnerable victims. And the phishing attempts, or the vishing attempts, I guess I should say, voice phishing, are getting more sophisticated. And so, but that falls into more of like a targeted attack type of situation. But, there's so many of these people that are basically trying to get you to either give them a credit card or some piece of identity information that they can use to like spend a lot of your money.
Mm-hmm. So is there like I'm very interested in this one part. Is it like is it almost like a deep fakes type deal for voice, like for scamming people? Like it sounds like somebody that they know for targeted attacks, for more sophisticated attacks, or no?
Oh, I have no idea. Yeah. Theoretically you could do that, but
I know there's the common one where, somebody calls up and is like, grandma, right? Like, and like just uses basic social engineering skills as far as, oh, I got like pulled over, I need money, that kind of thing, right? Taking advantage of, elderly people that'll give information. They're like, oh, Johnny, is this Johnny? You know what I mean? Because they're, it's somebody that doesn't call, and they take advantage of that. So it's not necessarily their pre-recorded script, although they some of those dump to call centers and things like that. Yeah. But I know that's an extremely common one for targeting, elderly individuals. So.
Yeah, I've heard of others that are like targeting immigrant populations. So like even targeted like foreign language attacks. And then if you call back the number, it might be like, they might have it set up to some kind of call center that is doing some kind of like IRS type scam. Like, you have to, you owe money in taxes, must give us all your information in order to do this. And so people are getting creative.
Yeah. Yeah, I always love that you've got a virus one. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Yeah. No. I was just you keep talking. I'm going to post some that cracked me up about the guy who goes after scammers, like meaning goes after, like wastes their time. Like it's hilarious. It's funny.
The 419 eaters style.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's,
spam scammers.
Yes.
James Vage. Yeah. Or Vage.
There you go.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
No, the one that I was thinking about, I always love that they call they call your phone and they're like, oh, you've got a virus on your computer. And you're like, really? And you're calling me on my phone. You realize the two aren't really tied together, right?
But see, you know that, and I know that.
Yeah, I know that. But yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, I know this is going to be successful against, again, my mother-in-law, right? Or somebody like that. I just am like, and then they call me up. They're like, well, we had somebody call, and I'm like, no, do not call them back.
Yeah,
it's a scam.
Well,
it's a scam.
I've gotten like legitimate calls that have sounded like they're phishing attacks, right? Like, Comcast calls you up and is like, they're, some person in like their inside sales department or whatever you call that, that's like, hey, you can like re-up your contract with us and get a lower rate if you like do it on the phone with me. And like, I've called them back because I like wanted to like know if that was a phishing attempt, and they were like, no, that was real. And it would have required me giving them like credit card information on the phone and all this stuff. And I think part of what this type of legislation is trying to solve is like those use cases where you can like get a call from Comcast and it says like, check mark, this is Comcast.
Yeah.
Which, that I super wouldn't answer it, but
yeah, exactly.
Well, it's funny because
that's not going to help things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, for
Just-
the example of like, it's like my delivery food order, like I'm going to probably answer that, or, it's my dentist office trying to like call and confirm my appointment, like those types of things. There's plenty of those phone calls that come from unknown numbers that you actually do want to answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's an issue that I've been having. Like the recent like updates to iOS, you've got the ability to basically say, hey, if I don't recognize this number, just send it straight to voicemail, right?
Yeah.
And like I have issues with that because I'm like, okay, again, my dentist office calling me back. That's not necessarily somebody that I have in my list anywhere.
Right.
And so it's very difficult to be like, okay, I'm navigating this weird line that you're talking about, as far as I get way too many calls because I know I've given out my number way too many times at conferences and online and everywhere that I get random stuff, right? And
you like, do what I do and set up a Twilio number as a proxy to your personal number.
Yeah,
so
there
I
you go.
Number everywhere and post that whatever you want.
Yeah, that's what I need to do, is just like convert this one over to Twilio and get a new personal one that, whatever. But it's fine. It's fine. We're trying to solve it different ways. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Kelley, we've been going for over an hour. Did we lose Ken? He's like frozen over there. No, we didn't. There we go.
I'm here.
He's there.
No, I'm here. I'm just listening, being attentive.
But yeah, we have been going over an hour. We want to make sure that we're, sensitive to everyone's. Well, I guess we haven't been going quite an hour. We started a little bit later, but we do have about 5 minutes left in the hour, podcast time. Is there anything that you wanted to bring up? I mean, we've talked and shaken, stirred. We've talked about, 2FA and SMS and Auth, and anything else that you would want to, bring up or, just talk about quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the slides that I like to include in all of my talks is from Cormac Curley, who is this great security researcher who does a lot of stuff on passwords. And he has this quote in one of his papers, is basically, when we exaggerate all fears or all issues, we just train users to ignore us. And so this is, like the type of practicality and consideration that I like to preach, is basically like, you got to be reasonable with your people and don't do any of this fear mongering more than necessary. Obviously, the world is a scary place, and as people that work in InfoSec, we're inundated with this every day. But the average user shouldn't be that afraid, and we have to build solutions that will be practical for the majority of people.
Yeah, and I'd almost argue too, right? Like you as a developer advocate or whatever else, like your user base that you're talking to isn't necessarily only consumers, right? Like we see this quite often internal to an organization, the security team, like everything's a fire. And so at that point, nothing is a fire to the community that they're trying to serve, because they, the first couple that times they jumped on their horse, they fixed it, and then the next week it happened again, right? Yeah. It can't happen.
If you're getting a
week.
PagerDuty alert about every single roll bar incident in your system, then nobody's going to want to start fixing your website.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be paying attention to those alerts. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I know from experience. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And I don't know. I always feel like that's one of the things that I try to I mean, Cormac, he said it great there, but at the same time, when you're dealing with something like an automated tool set that's spitting out alerts to developers that are intended for developers, you've got to be very careful about how much of that actually adds to their workload, because you do run into security fatigue. I don't know if a better way to put it than that they don't want to actually do anything. So yeah. Good call. So you will be at SchmookCon this week. If people or listeners wanted to interact with you, are there other places that you're going to be, or other places you're speaking?
I'll also be at B-Sides SF. So Seth, we should meet up there.
Yes, let's do. Yeah.
Twilio is going to have some people there as well. And then I'm going to be at Octane in San Francisco at the end of March. And then Twilio's conference in May, which is also in San Francisco.
Cool. All right. Yeah, we'll post some links to those to make sure that people are there, as well as links to your Twitter account.
Yeah.
Right. Follow your research, and
Twitter is definitely the best way to reach me, for better, for worse, for my own sanity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Oh,
we
yeah,
all have a
let me,
love-hate
go ahead.
relationship with Twitter at this point. So
Oh yeah, I agree. More of a hate relationship right now. I'm sure it'll go back. Let me post this. Cool. Get
Okay.
your Twitter handle up there.
Sweet. Well, we appreciate you coming on and you giving us, an hour of your time to talk through all the things, all the security things. Good luck at ShmooCon with your talk out there this week, and let's make sure and connect at Besides SF. At the very least, we've got some AppSec, Absolute AppSec swag as far as like T-shirts or
nice.
Stickers and everything else. That
Excellent. I just put in an order for some swag socks, so we can trade.
Sweet, yeah, that'd be awesome. You have some Authy ones. I'd love some Authy swag. So
yeah, they're Twilio and Authy branded.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to send you an email because I am actually going to the post office this week to send out some swag. So I'm going to send you a reminder.
Sounds good.
Sweet. Good deal. All right. Well, Kelley, thanks for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening today. Ken, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about before we?
No, just thank you for your time. It was very informative. And honestly, I had so many questions that, we could have gone for 3 hours. So this is really awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Very awesome. Thank you. Okay. See everybody next week. Thanks.
Bye.